Okay, so today we're going to talk about AAC assessment. So an AAC assessment is really about gathering and analyzing information so that individuals with complex communication needs can be part of making decisions about the adequacy of current communication, their current and future communication needs, as well as AAC techniques that appear to be most appropriate, and also identify ways of how to provide instruction regarding the use of such techniques and assessing the outcomes and success of such a system. So who is involved in an assessment process? At the most basic level, the individual with complex communication needs. We have to have their involvement as well as have an understanding of their motivation and communication and needs and environments. Involved are also family members, or caregivers, or people close to the individual, and a number of experts and professionals, depending on the nature and severity of the individual's needs. So you would need an AAC specialist or expert specializing in augmentative communication who can make an unbiased decision about what AAC tools or systems to recommend. You also need to involve the speech-language pathologist, especially if that is not the same person as the AAC specialist, assistive tech practitioners, occupational therapists, physical therapists, paraprofessionals, the general or special education teacher, inclusion specialist, team leaders. All or any of those members can be involved. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be part of the entire evaluation process, but their input and expertise should certainly be brought to light in the evaluation process. So there are some different assessment methods and models that can be used. There's a candidacy model that once was a standard by which individuals would determine whether or not an individual was ready or appropriate for AAC systems. That's really not what we use today. ASHA has endorsed, the American Speech Language Hearing Association has endorsed the use of the participation model for AAC assessments. And that really has four major facets. There's a referral for an AAC assessment, which identifies an individual with complex communication needs and initiates the assessment process. Then there's an initial assessment, an intervention for today. So that's a process of identifying what are the individual's current communication methods, modes, needs, areas of need, areas of strength, as well as their physical, cognitive, and linguistic abilities. Then you also have to take into account an assessment for tomorrow. So what tool is going to be able to follow this individual as they grow and they advance or their vocation changes. So it really is an assessment for tomorrow. And as part of the evaluation process, there's also a follow-up assessment to ensure that the device is functioning as it should, determine whether or not it's still appropriate and relevant, secure maintenance or repairs, or make adjustments as needed. So the participation model really looks at things that are typically developing and uses that as a guide to determine what an individual can or cannot participate in. And that really helps set the standard. So it's a comparison of what are other individuals doing that individual with complex communication needs would want to do. So this model takes into account the existence of communication participation patterns, so what has typically been happening for this individual, as well as any barriers to participation. It also assesses the effectiveness of previous strategies and determines new potential strategies that could enhance an individual's participation. As previously mentioned, there are four phases of the assessment. There really is the referral, then an initial assessment, an assessment tomorrow, and follow-up. As part of this, the assessment team does a capability assessment. So it's a process of gathering information about an individual's capabilities in a variety of areas. So we really need to be able to identify areas of strength rather than just impairment, and use these areas of strength to help an individual develop and determine the best mode of communication based on that individual's unique needs. So we can't really do norm referenced or standardized tests because these assessments are not normed or standardized on individuals with complex communication needs. Most typically, they are not. These assessments can be used as a guide, but oftentimes we advise teams to, and speech pathologists conducting the assessments, to assess what kind of prompting techniques and strategies can help an individual be more successful, or if provided with pictures or an AAC system, were they able to answer those questions? And all of those adaptations really disrupt the standardization of the assessment. So it's important to know that these assessments cannot just stand in isolation, as they are not really designed to address the needs of individuals with complex communication needs. So rather than that, we use a series of criterion referenced or feature matching assessment tools. And these are really carefully selected and designed to answer specific questions, so whether or not it's about access or vocabulary. And often the individual serves as a point of comparison or typical peers within their environment. And so really it's not held in comparison to this norm, really rather looking at the individual themselves and using their strengths and areas of need as a guide. So there are a whole bunch of different assessment domains that we need to explore when we're doing an AAC assessment. We have to take into account the process of positioning and seating, as this greatly affects how an individual is going to interact with the system. Are they going to use direct selection? Do they need manipulatives? Is this affected if they're in a wheelchair or in a stander? What happens when they go to bed? So all those things have to be taken into account. So often we need to call on the expertise of physical and occupational therapists to talk to the effects that positioning can have on reflexive movement, posture, balance, strength, a level of fatigue over the course of the day. So really is a critical point, a piece of an AAC assessment is their positioning and seating, as well as motor capabilities. So hand, arm, head, orofacial, foot, and leg control. When we're thinking about alternative forms of access, we're looking for a point of access. So what can that individual reliably use to access a tool? Is it a finger? Is it their tongue? Is it an eye blink? Is it a gesture? Is it a movement? And then we also have to look at the overall accuracy of the movement, the range of motion. Does this change over the course of the day? What happens when someone's constantly put under the strain of making a selection? So that obviously has to be taken into account. And all of this is critical, especially if we're thinking about providing someone access via switch control. So where is the point of access? Where is that switch going to go? What happens with repetitive use? Individuals are making selections 400 times in a few hours in the course of a school day. So what does that long-term access look like? And how do we manage issues of fatigue, strength, and range of motion? We also have to look at cognitive and linguistic abilities. So what are the individual's cognitive skills? And not in terms of a whole neuropsychology assessment battery, but thinking more about their awareness, communicative intent, their general knowledge, their memory, their understanding of the symbolic representation of the icons. So as part of the assessment, we do take into account symbol assessment. We also have to look at a language assessment. Is this individual understanding single words, different morphemes? What about syntax and grammar? And, they may be expressing at a certain language level, but they may understand something quite different at a different language level. So we really have to pay attention to that. We also need to take into account literacy skills. Are they reading? Are they writing? Can they spell? If so, can they access word prediction and other rate enhancement techniques? And then what about sensory perceptual skills? Vision and hearing. How are they able to hear the output of the device? Do they need different kind of visual context to be more successful, such as a certain size field or foils within the visual field, or high contrast, or different color combinations? All of that gets looked into. And then we also have to pay attention to whether or not someone needs proprioceptive feedback. Do they need to hold an item? Do they need to manipulate it? Or are they tactically defensive? So again, these are all different parts that have to be assessed in an AAC assessment. Additional considerations are, what are some policy barriers? Thinking about healthcare, is an individual's insurance going to cover some of that? Or the cost of a dedicated communication system or one that isn't? Are there any practice barriers? What about knowledge and skills of communication partners within the environment? What about the attitude? Is this something that the family wants, the school wants, team members want? And how do we account for those different things? And when we go, and we'll talk in greater detail about what an assessment looks like, but we have to have an implementation plan, and so therefore need to take into account these potential barriers. We also need to plan for future communication needs. As I mentioned, this is not just an assessment for today, but for tomorrow. Many standards set by Medicare are that individuals really can't get access to a new device within a 5-year plan within a 5-year period, unless there's been a major change in their health status or something else. So these really are meant to be long-term solutions, relatively long-term. And they also involve constant monitoring, tweaking, adjusting, making sure it's functioning. Even though these are sophisticated high-tech tools in many situations, they often need tweaking, adjusting, updating, and that also has to be considered when making a recommendation. So there are different diagnostic tools. As previously mentioned, their standardized measures are really only to be used as guides, and we really want to get a good sense of what are the individual's skills as they relate to their own needs, not compared to the norm. Some assessments that don't require verbal response or involve manipulatives may be more helpful, especially when we're working with individuals with complex communication needs. There are also a number of tools available that assess icon size, icon number, as well as the kind of vocabulary and language that should be included in a tool. AAC Genie is one. There is also an exploration wizard on some of the high-tech speech-generating devices, and these really present an individual with a whole series of screens that help narrow down what icon size, number, and vocabulary should be included in an AAC system. And none of these, of course, can be used outside of or without the combination of clinical intuition and experience. There's a lot that goes into an AAC system recommendation, and so therefore it's information gathered from all of these different professionals and resources, and then compiled to offer the best combination to meet the individual's unique needs. So just going to walk through a sample evaluation based on Medicare standards. So even though an individual may not be eligible for Medicare, Medicare really sets the gold standard by which other insurance companies and professionals prescribe to ensure that they offer a comprehensive assessment. So we obviously start with demographic information about the individual, including their insurance information and oftentimes their social security number, but not in all cases. It's important to note their native language, as well as team members, such as key team members, such as a speech pathologist and or AAC specialist, as well as the doctor who ultimately makes a referral for a specific AAC system. So we offer some background information, provide a reason for referral. Why is this individual being recommended for an assessment? What is their background? Are they in school? What grade? Is it an inclusive program? Are they receiving specialized services? And then also just a little bit more about the individual's unique characteristics to try and paint a picture for a reviewer, especially if we're going for insurance coverage. Important to note is, on a very simple level, is the individual understood? If not, roughly what percentage? And are they frustrated if not understood? Those are really critical components when determining whether or not someone is eligible for an AAC system. So we then have to go into greater detail about their speech and language status, so including, and we typically recommend to tease out their receptive language and expressive language, as that's obviously is oftentimes offers a major discrepancy. And individuals have receptive language strengths, but expressive challenges due to the nature and severity of their diagnosis. And so to show this discrepancy is really useful. We then also have to talk about cognition, but really as it relates to AAC use, their memory, their receptiveness to the tool, their understanding of how to navigate the tool, so on and so forth. We have to look at their current communication needs, their environments, the individuals with whom they need to communicate, as well as the different contexts and purposes. We have to touch on sensory and motor. So what is their visual and hearing status, as well as their motor status? This is extremely important and helps to narrow down the right features that are available within an AAC system, and therefore helps us narrow down our recommendation. So we paint this picture of an individual based on their speech and language and cognition, as well as their vision, hearing, and motor needs. Based on these combination of features, we then detail the required features in an AAC system. So what kind of language system is needed? Do they need just pictures or a combination of pictures and words? Do they need spelling and word prediction? What kind of symbols are they able to understand or represent? Do they need a specific symbol set based on their environment? We also have to talk about how is the individual going to access the device. If it's direct selection, do they need a key guard? If they need some indirect selection options such as scanning, more and more information is needed about that. We then also have to touch on just general device characteristics. Is this device being transported from A to B? Does it need a protective case? Does it need a mounting system? What about battery life? Do photos need to be included on the system? Does someone need that kind of personalization or the use of real photos? One of the major things, do we need synthesized or digitized voice? Synthesized makes the output options endless, whereas digitized is reliant on an individual's recording of the voice. Once we've narrowed down those features, we then have to detail at least 3 different comparable systems and do a process of elimination as to why one does not meet the individual's needs in comparison to another. Typically what happens at this juncture is that once we've narrowed down a system, we do a 4-week trial prior to requesting purchase. This doesn't mean you have to do a 4-week trial of each of the 3 trialed systems detailed, but you have to offer an explanation as to why that kind of system does not meet the individual's needs. This is just a thorough process that shows an insurance company that you didn't just come up with this one AAC system without thinking about comparable or cheaper solutions. And so this is really detailed in this process. Once we've detailed those 3 different systems, we've hopefully narrowed it down to one that we're going to recommend for a 4-week trial. And we summarize this and detail specifically what we're looking for. Every item that is detailed in the recommended device needs to be substantiated within the report. So if you're asking for a key guard, it needs to be described as to why a key guard is needed. If you're asking for an accessible case, you need to detail why. Even if it's a symbol set or the device itself, it has to be detailed at somewhere within the evaluation. In addition, we have to talk about a treatment plan and follow-up. So what is going to happen while we wait for the AAC system, and what's going to happen upon its arrival? Who's going to be implementing intervention? Who's going to program vocabulary? And who's going to provide the necessary training? Who's going to monitor the success of the device? And how is data going to be collected? And on what goals is data going to be collected? So all of that needs to be detailed. At the end of that, The speech-language pathologist or critical team members need to be able to sign the device, and also make a note that the copy of the device is being forwarded to the individual's pediatrician or doctor, as ultimately the doctor reviews the report and writes a script for the recommended device and accessories. It's also critically important that whomever is writing the report, who's typically a speech-language pathologist, makes note that they have no financial relationship nor will receive any financial gain from the supplier. It's critically important that there's no conflict of interest in making their recommendation, and therefore it's important that you have AAC specialists or speech pathologists that have an understanding of a variety of different AAC systems to ensure that this is an unbiased recommendation. So that's AAC assessment in a nutshell. It's a very comprehensive process that really does rely on a number of professionals to make a really thorough, grounded, evidence-based recommendation.